guys know about the red pill, blue pill game? For any of you that don't know about it, let me explain. Red pill or blue pill is a party game that challenges you to pick between two tough dilemmas, kind of like would you rather. For example, you can either choose the blue pill, which means you would bite into an apple and find half a worm, or choose the red pill, which means you would bite into a sandwich and find a cockroach. Hypothetical questions like that. But what if someone took the game literally? They gave you a choice, either take the red pill or the blue pill, but one of them is poisoned. You can't choose not to take either. In fact, that person has tied you to a chair deep in a bunker where no one will ever find you, so you either lose your mind, starve to death, or take the 50-50 he's offering you. But don't worry, this person isn't cruel. They will take whichever pill you don't pick. Which pill would you choose? The red one or the blue one? Welcome back to this week's story. I'm your host, Anasti, and today we are starting a new show. And before all of you come at me for the fact that I started a bunch of series that I have yet to finish, like Girl from Nowhere, Black Mirror, Doctor Who, and Chasing Tales, this will be the last show that I'll start in this standalone type fashion, I promise. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called Sherlock. This is a recap of the British show starring Benedict Cumberbatch, and I believe a lot of the episodes are loosely based off of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. This was my all-time favorite show before I watched Doctor Who, and this is also my first introduction to Benedict Cumberbatch. Doctor Strange had not yet come out, and I was far too young to care about all the other stuff that he did. I thought that he did a great job as Sherlock Holmes, and I'm gonna start you guys off from the very beginning, so buckle up because this series gets wild. In a small studio apartment somewhere in London, John Watson is having a nightmare. He's in the middle of a battlefield, shots are being fired all around him, colleagues are crying out his name. One particularly loud blast wakes him up. He's disoriented as he tries to calm down, and when he finally realizes it's a nightmare, he collapses back onto the bed. He takes in deep breaths, trying to slow down his heartbeat, but a couple seconds later, he starts weeping. Eventually, he sits up, staring blankly at the fireplace in front of him, and then his gaze shifts to a metal walking cane that's leaning against his desk. The next morning, he hobbles across the room with his cane in one hand and a cup of tea and an apple in the other. He sets them down on his desk, sits down, opens a drawer, and pulls out his laptop. As he lifts the laptop out of the drawer, though, we see that he also has a gun in there. John opens his laptop to a website titled The Personal Blog of Dr. John H. Watson, but there's nothing on the page. It looks like a blank book that only has a title. The blog becomes the topic of conversation between John and his therapist Ella later that day. Ella believes that John has trust issues, and maybe he does, because he reads whatever she writes in his report as he sits opposite her in these sessions. Turns out John can read upside down, and he can't keep his eyes off of his report. His trust issues might stem from the PTSD he's gotten since being discharged from the military, but Ella firmly believes that writing this blog could help him. A couple days later, on October 12th, a well-dressed businessman is walking across a busy train station while talking to his secretary. Turns out that her husband is not in town, which means the two of them can get frisky. The man rushes to get a cab, but a couple hours later, he's sitting on the floor by the window of an office many stories above ground. He unscrews the lid of a small glass bottle, which contains 3 large pills, tips one pill out, and while staring ahead wide-eyed, puts the capsule in his mouth. He then falls to the ground, writhing in agony. The camera zooms out, and the man is the only thing in the space. The office is devoid of anything, really. There's no cubicles, no chairs, no tables. It's just him laying on the floor, taking his last breaths. The news of his death is aired on TV while his crying wife is making a statement. "My husband was a happy man who lived life to the full. He loved his family and his work, and that he should have taken his own life in this way is a mystery and a shock to all those who knew him." But his wife is not the only one that's shedding tears. The man's secretary is standing off to the side, crying silently while listening to the wife's statement. On November 26th, 2 boys in their late teens are running down a street at night in the pouring rain. One of them has an umbrella over his head, and he's trying to keep the wind from flipping it over. The other boy has his jacket pulled over his head to stop from getting wet, but eventually he gives up and starts running the other way while shouting to his friend, "I'll be back in 2 minutes, mate. I'm just going home. Get my mom's umbrella." But he never comes back. Instead, we see him crying and clutching a small glass bottle that contains 3 large pills. He unscrews the lid while sobbing. The camera zooms out and we see that he's sitting on a window ledge inside a sports center overlooking a sports court. The following day, an article in the Daily Express runs the headline, "Boy 18 kills himself inside of Sports Center." On January 27th, a party is being held for Beth Davenport. Beth is the local junior minister for transport. Her assistants are exasperated because the woman is still dancing the night away. Thankfully, one of them has managed to grab Beth's car keys out of her bag so she can't leave and cause trouble without them knowing. But before they can breathe a sigh of relief, they realize that they can't see her on the dance floor anymore. Beth made her way out of the venue and is standing at the side of her car, searching through her handbag for her keys. She sighs when she can't find them and looks around helplessly. Sometime later, Beth stands inside a small cabin on a building site and sobs hysterically. She's trembling as she reaches a hand out towards a small glass bottle which contains 3 large pills. And of course, all of these deaths are going to start attracting public attention, so the police arrange for a press conference. Detective Inspector Lestrade sits at a table looking uncomfortable as his colleague Donovan gives a debrief on the whole situation. The body of Beth Davenport, Junior Minister for Transport, was found late last night on a building site in Greater London. Preliminary investigation suggests that this was a suicide. We can confirm that this apparent suicide closely resembles those of Sir Geoffrey Patterson and James Fillmore. In the light of this, these incidents are now being treated as linked. The investigation is ongoing, but Detective Inspector Lestrade will take questions now. And as the questions start, Inspector Lestrade starts wiggling in his seat. "Detective Inspector, how can suicides be linked?" "Well, they all took the same poison. They were all found in places they had no reason to be. None of them had shown any prior indication of, but you can't have serial suicide, sir." "Well, apparently you can. These 3 people, there's nothing that links them at all?" "There's no link that has been found yet, but we are looking for it. There has to be one." And then something really strange happens. Everyone's phone rings at the same time. They take out their phones to find a text that simply reads, "Wrong." Donovan tries to tell them all to ignore the text and tries to end the press conference, but a reporter pipes up. "If they are suicides, what are you investigating?" As I say, these suicides are clearly linked. It's an unusual situation. We've got our best people investigating. Everyone's phone rings again, and it's the same text message again. It simply reads, "Wrong." Inspector Lestrade looks towards Donovan for help, who calls out that they'll take one more question. "Is there any chance that these are murders? And if they are, is this the work of a serial killer? I know that you like writing about these, but these do appear to be suicides. We know the difference. The poison was clearly self-administered." "Yes, but if they are murders, how do people keep themselves safe?" "Well, don't commit suicide." The reporter looks at Inspector Lestrade like he's grown a second head, while Donovan whispers in his ear, "That's the Daily Mail's reporter, Inspector Lestrade." Lestrade grimaces and tries to elaborate on his mess up. Obviously, this is a frightening time for people, but all anyone has to do is exercise reasonable precautions. We are all as safe as we want to be." Everyone's phones ring again, and it's the same text message again. "Wrong." But this time, Lestrade's phone rings a second time. He looks at the text and it reads, "You know where to find me, S.H." Rolling his eyes, he puts the phone in his pocket and stands up, effectively ending the press conference. He and his colleague are walking through offices as Donovan berates him. "You've got to stop him from doing that. He's making us look like idiots." "Well, if you can tell me how he does it, I'll stop him." On the other side of town, John is making his way through a park when someone calls after him. John Watson!" John turns back to see a man hurtling towards him with a big smile. "Stamford, Mike Stamford. We were at Bart's together?" Yes, Mike. Hello. Hi. Yeah, I know, I got fat." No, I heard that you were abroad somewhere getting shot at. What happened?" "I got shot." The two look embarrassed before they go to get coffee and settle down on a bench. Mike looks a little worried as he looks at John, but John doesn't notice. Instead, he starts a conversation. "Are you still at Bart's then?" "Teaching now. Bright young things, like we used to be. God, I hate them. What about you? You just staying in town till you get yourself sorted?" "I can't afford to live in London on an army pension." "Ah, and you couldn't bear to be anywhere else. That's not the John Watson I know." "Yeah, I'm not the John Watson." Couldn't Harry help?" "Yeah, like that's ever gonna happen." I don't know, get a flat share or something? Come on, Mike, who would want to be my flatmate? Mike laughs, but it's kind of like a wow, what a coincidence kind of laugh. You know, you're the second person to say that to me today. Who was the first? The first was someone at St. Bartholomew's Hospital morgue. Sherlock Holmes unzips a body bag, gets closer to the corpse, and sniffs. How fresh. His assistant Molly walks over. Justin, 67, natural causes. He used to work here. I know him. He was nice. Sherlock straightens and puts on a fake smile. Fine, we'll start with the writing corp. And a couple minutes later, Sherlock flogs the body repeatedly with a riding corp. And guys, it's not gentle taps. He's really going in. It's like he's taking out all of his pent-up rage on this body. Molly is standing in the observation room and she can't help the conflicting emotions she's having. She's bothered by him, but she also admires him a lot. When Sherlock finishes, she walks over to him. So, bad day, was it? Instead of looking at her or even reciprocating her banter, he gets out a notebook and starts writing. I need to know what bruises form in the next 20 minutes. A man's alibi depends on it. Text me. Listen, Sherlock, I was wondering, maybe later when you're finished, he looks up from his notebook and does a double take. Are you wearing lipstick? You weren't wearing any lipstick earlier. I refreshed it a little bit. She smiles at him in a way that I guess is supposed to be flirtatious. He just stares at her for a few seconds and then goes back to writing in his notebook. Sorry, you were saying? I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee? Black, 2 sugars, please. I'll be upstairs. And he walks away. While he busies himself with pipetting a few drops of liquid onto a petri dish, Mike knocks on the door. Sherlock glances towards the door briefly before looking back at his work again. John limps into the room, looking around at all of the equipment. Well, it's a bit different from my day. Mike chuckles. You have no idea, John. But Sherlock is all about work. Mike, can I borrow your phone? There's no signal in mine. And what's wrong with the landline? I prefer to text. Sorry, it's in my coat. John reaches into his back pocket and takes out his own phone. Here, use mine. Oh, thank you. Mike uses this chance to introduce Sherlock to John. He's an old friend of mine, John Watson. Sherlock takes John's phone from him and then turns partially away from John as he flips the keypad and starts typing into it. Afghanistan or Iraq? Sorry? Was it Afghanistan or Iraq? Afghanistan. Sorry, how did you know? Sherlock shuts down John's phone and hands it back to him while Molly brings the cup of coffee over to him. He takes it and then looks closely at her. What happened to the lipstick? It wasn't working for me. Really? I thought it was a big improvement. Your mouth's too small now. He turns and walks back to his station while taking a sip of his coffee. Based on his expression when the taste hits his tongue though, it's probably not great coffee. Without looking at anyone, he asks a question. How do you feel about the violin? John looks around at Molly, but she's on her way out the door. He glances at Mike, who's just smiling, and finally he realizes that Sherlock is talking to him. I'm sorry, what? I play the violin when I'm thinking. Sometimes I don't talk for days on end. Would that bother you? Potential flatmates should know the worst about each other. John looks at him blankly for a moment before looking at Mike. Oh, you told him about me. Not a word, John. John turns back to Sherlock. Then who said anything about flatmates? I did. Told Mike this morning that I must be a difficult man to find a flatmate for. Now he's here just after lunch with an old friend, clearly just home from military service in Afghanistan. Wasn't that difficult of a lead? How did you know about Afghanistan? Sherlock completely ignores the question. Got my eye on a nice little place in central London. Thought we ought to be able to afford it together. We'll meet there tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. Sorry, gotta dash. I think I left my writing corp in the mortuary. Sherlock starts making his way to the door, but John stops him. Is that it? Is that what? We've only just met and we're gonna go and look at a flat? Problem? We don't know a thing about each other. I don't know where we're meeting. I don't even know your name. Sherlock looks closely at him for a moment before speaking. I know you're an army doctor and you've been invalidated home from Afghanistan. I know you've got a brother who's worried about you, but you won't go to him for help because you don't approve of him. Possibly because he's an alcoholic. More likely because he recently walked out on his wife. And I know that your therapist thinks your limp is psychosomatic. Quite correctly, I'm afraid. That's enough to be going on with, don't you think? John looks down at his leg and cane and shuffles his feet awkwardly, and Sherlock turns and goes to the door, but then he leans back into the room. The name's Sherlock Holmes and the address is 221B. Baker Street. Sherlock disappears after that, and as the door slams shut, John turns and looks at Mike in disbelief. Mike smiles and nods to him. Yeah, he's always like that. Later that day, John is back in his studio apartment looking at the text that Sherlock sent using his phone, and the text is strange to say the least. It reads, "If brother has green ladder, arrest brother, SH." John looks at it completely puzzled for a second before he makes his way to his laptop. He pulls up the Google of that time and searches for Sherlock Holmes. At the same time, in an unknown location, a woman wearing a pink overcoat and pink high-heeled shoes slowly reaches down with a trembling hand towards a clear glass bottle which is sitting on bare floorboards. The glass bottle contains 3 large pills. At 7, John makes his way to 221B Baker Street just as a black cab pulls up. Mr. Holmes, Sherlock, please. Well, this is a prime spot. Must be expensive. Oh, Mrs. Hudson, the landlady, she's giving me a special deal. Owes me a favor. A few years back, her husband got himself sentenced to death in Florida. I was able to help out. Sorry, you stopped her husband from being executed? Oh no, I insured it. He smiles as the door opens to reveal Mrs. Hudson, an old lady probably in her late 60s. She opens her arms for a hug, which Sherlock indulges in before introducing her to John. They make their way to the first floor where the living room is, and it's kind of a mess. It has a lot of boxes, teacups, envelopes, and skulls scattered everywhere. Well, this could be very nice indeed. Yes, I think so. My thoughts precisely. And Sherlock looks so happy as he looks around the flat. In fact, he was so happy with it that he went ahead and moved in already. That's why it looks like a complete mess. Mrs. Hudson makes her way into the room and turns to John. What do you think then, Dr. Watson? There's another bedroom upstairs if you'll be needing 2 bedrooms. Of course we'll be needing 2 bedrooms. Oh, don't worry, there's all sorts around here. Mrs. Turner next door got married once. John turns to Sherlock for help, but the man is either oblivious or just doesn't care. Mrs. Hudson walks across the kitchen while scolding Sherlock for the mess that he's made. John uses this time to reveal the research that he's conducted on Sherlock yesterday. I looked you up on the internet last night. Anything interesting? Found your website, The Science of Deduction. Sherlock smiles very proudly as he asks John his opinion, but John throws him a "Are you serious?" look, and that hurts Sherlock's feelings. You said you could identify a software designer by his tie and an airline pilot by his left thumb. Yes, and I can read your military career in your face and your leg and your brother's drinking habits in your phone. How? Sherlock smiles and turns away. Mrs. Hudson comes out of the kitchen reading a newspaper. What about these suicides then, Sherlock? I thought that'd be right up your street. 3 exactly the same. Sherlock walks up to the window of the living room at the sound of a car pulling up outside. It's a police car with flashing lights. There's been a 4th, and there's something different this time, Mrs. Hudson. Sherlock turns as Lestrade trots up the stairs and comes into the living room. Completely unrelated detail, but the man definitely picked the lock to this house or something, because Mrs. Hudson did in fact lock the front door. Anyway, Sherlock takes one look at Lestrade before asking, "Where?" "Brixton, Lauriston Gardens. What's new about this one? He wouldn't have come to get me if there wasn't something different." "You know how they never leave notes?" "Yeah. This one did. Will you come?" "Who's on forensics?" "It's Anderson." "Anderson won't want to work with me." "Well, he won't be your assistant." "I need an assistant, Lestrade." "Will you come?" "Not in a police car. I'll be right behind." "Thank you, Sherlock." Lestrade looks at John and Mrs. Hudson for a moment before he turns and hurries off down the stairs. Sherlock waits until Lestrade has reached the front door, and then he leaps into the air and pumps his fist before twirling around the room happily. Brilliant! 4 serial suicides and now a note. Oh, it's Christmas! "Mrs. Hudson, I'll be late. Might need some food. I'm your landlady, dear, not your housekeeper. Something cold will do. John, have a cup of tea. Make yourself at home. Don't wait up." He turns around and grabs a small leather pouch from the kitchen table before dashing out. Mrs. Hudson just shakes her head. "Look at him dashing about. My husband was just the same, but you're more the sitting down type. I can tell. I'll make you that cuppa. You rest your leg, dear." But at the reference of his leg, John shouts out a "Damn my leg!" Mrs. Hudson is shocked, but John apologizes as he bashes his leg with the cane. "Cup of tea'd be lovely, thank you." "Just this once, dear. I'm not your housekeeper. Couple of biscuits too, if you've got them." Not your housekeeper. John picks up the newspaper Mrs. Hudson put down and looks at the article reporting Beth Davenport's apparent suicide. Next to a large photograph of Beth is a smaller one showing Lestrade. Before he can read anything though, Sherlock's voice interrupts him. John looks up and sees him standing in the living room door. You're a doctor. In fact, you're an army doctor. Yes? Any good? Very good. Seen a lot of injuries then? Violent deaths? Yeah. Bit of trouble too, I bet. Oh, of course, yes. Enough for a lifetime. Far too much. Want to see some more? Oh God, yes. Sherlock spins on his heel and leads John out of the room and down the stairs. John follows while shouting out to Mrs. Hudson to cancel the tea. Mrs. Hudson pops her head out before making her way down the stairs. Both of you. Sherlock turns around and walks back towards her. Impossible suicides, 4 of them. There's no point sitting at home when there's finally something fun going on. He takes her by the shoulders and kisses her noisily on the cheek. Look at you, all happy. It's not decent, Sherlock. Who cares about decent? The game, Mrs. Hudson, is on. They both get into a taxi, and it's a bit awkward at first. Sherlock's eyes are glued to his smartphone as John keeps stealing nervous glances at him. Eventually, the awkward atmosphere penetrates Sherlock's consciousness, so he lowers his phone. Okay, you've got questions. Yeah, where are we going? Crime scene. Next. Who are you? What do you do? What do you think I do? I'd say private detective, but the police don't go to private detectives. I'm a consulting detective, only one in the world. I invented the job. What does that mean? It means when the police are out of their depth, which is always, they consult me. The police don't consult amateurs. Sherlock throws him a look. When I met you for the first time yesterday, I said Afghanistan or Iraq. You looked surprised. Yes, how did you know? I didn't know. I saw. Your haircut, the way you hold yourself, says military, but your conversation as you entered the room says trained at Bart's, so army doctor. Your face is tan, but no tan above the wrist. You've been abroad, but not sunbathing. Your limp's really bad when you walk, but you don't ask for a chair when you stand, like you've forgotten about it, so it's at least partly psychosomatic. That says original circumstances of the injury were traumatic. Wounded in action, then. Wounded in action, suntan, Afghanistan, or Iraq. You said I had a therapist. You've got a psychosomatic limp. Of course you've got a therapist. Then there's your brother. Sherlock holds out his hand and John gives him his phone and Sherlock turns it over and looks at it as he talks again. Your phone, it's expensive, email enabled, MP3 player, but you're looking for a flat share? You wouldn't waste money on this. It's a gift then. Scratches, not one, many over time. It's been in the same pocket as keys and coins. The man sitting next to me wouldn't treat his one luxury item like this, so it's had a previous owner. Next bit's easy, you know it already. The engraving. On the back of the phone, we see the words Harry Watson from Clara XXX engraved into the metal. Harry Watson, clearly a family member who's given you his old phone. Not your father, this is a young man's gadget. Could be a cousin, but you're a war hero who can't find a place to live. Unlikely that you've got some extended family somewhere, certainly not ones that you're close to, so brother it is. Now Clara, who's Clara? 3 kisses says it's a romantic attachment. The expense of the phone says wife, not girlfriend. She must have given it to him recently. This model is only 6 months old. Marriage in trouble then. 6 months on, he's just given it away. If she'd left him, he'd have kept it. People do that. Sentiment. But no, he wanted to get rid of it. He left her. He gave the phone to you. That says he wants you to stay in touch. You're looking for cheap accommodation, but you're not going to your brother for help. That says you've got a problem with him. Maybe you liked his wife. Maybe you don't like his drinking. How could you possibly know about the drinking? Shot in the dark. Good one though. Power connection. Tiny little scuff marks around the edge of it. Every night he goes to plug it in to charge, but his hands are shaking. You never see those marks on a sober man's phone. Never seen a drunk's without them. There you go, you see, you were right. I was right. Right about what? The police don't consult amateurs. Sherlock looks out the side window while biting his lip nervously as he awaits John's reaction. That was amazing. Sherlock looks around, apparently so surprised that he can't reply for the next 4 seconds, which is really hard for this man because he talks so much and so fast. Do you think so? Of course it was. It was extraordinary. It was quite extraordinary. That's not what people normally say. What do people normally say? Piss off. He smiles at John, who grins back, before they both turn to look out their respective windows for the rest of the ride. They arrive at the crime scene, and as they're walking towards the police tape, Sherlock grows curious. Did I get anything wrong? Harry and I don't get along, never have. Clara and Harry split up about 3 months ago, and they're getting a divorce. And Harry is a drinker. Spot on then. I didn't expect to be right about everything. And Harry's short for Harriet. Sherlock stops dead in his tracks as John continues walking. Harry's your sister? Look, what exactly am I supposed to be doing here, Sherlock? Sherlock grits his teeth. Sister? No, seriously, what am I doing here? There's always something. They approach the police tape where they're met by Donovan, and it's very, very clear that she does not like Sherlock in the slightest. They argue for a while about how in the world someone like Sherlock can even have a colleague, referring to John, but alas, since Sherlock was requested to come by Lestrade, she has to let them in. She lifts her radio to her mouth. Freak's here, bringing him in. She leads the boys towards one of the houses, and as they reach the building, a man wearing a coverall comes out of the house. Ah, Anderson, here we are again. It's a crime scene. I don't want it contaminated. Are we clear on that? Quite clear. And is your wife away for long? Oh, don't pretend that you worked that out. Somebody told you that. Your deodorant told me that. My deodorant? It's for men. Well, of course it's for men. I'm wearing it. So is Sergeant Donovan's. Anderson looks at Donovan in shock. Sherlock sniffs in an exaggerated way. Ooh, I think it just vaporized. May I go in? Now look, whatever it is that you're trying to imply, I'm not implying anything. I'm sure Sally came round for a nice little chat and just happened to stay over. I assume she scrubbed your floors going by the state of her knees. Sally is Sergeant Donovan's first name, by the way. Anyway, Anderson and Donovan stare at Sherlock in horror, but Sherlock smiles smugly and goes into the house. John walks past Sally, and he can't help but look down to Donovan's knees as he follows Sherlock inside. Sherlock leads him into a room where Lestrade is putting on a coverall. Sherlock points to the pile of coveralls and tells John to put them on as well, while he puts on a pair of latex gloves. The three of them head upstairs as Lestrade starts telling them about the situation. Her name's Jennifer Wilson, according to her credit cards. We're running them now for contact details. Hasn't been here for long, some kids found her. He leads them into a room 2 stories above ground, and the room is empty of furniture except for like a rocking horse in the corner, and the woman's body is lying face down in the middle of the room. She's wearing a bright pink overcoat and pink high-heeled shoes, and her hands are flat on the floor on either side of her head. The three of them stand there silently for several long seconds. Then Sherlock looks across to Lestrade. Shut up. I didn't say anything. You were thinking. It's annoying. Lestrade and John exchange looks as Sherlock steps forward until he reaches the side of the corpse. His attention is immediately drawn to the fact that scratched into the floorboards near the woman's left hand is the word rate. His eyes flicker to her fingernails, where her index and middle fingernails are broken and ragged at the ends. The pink nail polish on these 2 fingers is chipped, and it creates a stark comparison between these nails and her other ones, which are still in perfect condition. The woman's index finger rests at the bottom of the E, as if she was still trying to carve into the floor when she died. Sherlock makes an instant deduction, left-handed. He looks back to the word carved into the floorboards, and a suggestion springs into his mind. Rache, German noun for revenge. But he shakes his head to dismiss the thought. He looks at the carved word again and overlays the 5 letters with a clearer type. Next to the E, a rapid progression of letters appear and disappear as he tries to complete the word. He only stops sifting through the letters when the letter L appears. Rachel. He squats down beside the body, runs his glove along the back of her coat, and then lifts his hand to look at his fingers. They're wet. He reaches into her coat pockets and finds a white umbrella. He runs his fingers across the fold of the material and then inspects his gloved fingers again. They're dry. Putting the umbrella back into her pocket, he moves up to the collar of her coat and runs his fingers underneath it. This time his fingers are wet again. He reaches into his pocket and takes out a small magnifier. He brings it close to a delicate gold bracelet on her left wrist. It's clean. No scratches, no dirt. It's so polished that it looks like it was just bought from the store. Then he looks at the gold earrings attached to her right ear. That's also clean. And then the gold chain around her neck. Clean. He moves on to look at the rings on her left finger. The wedding ring and the engagement ring are dirty. They've got scratches on them. They're not as shiny as her other jewelry. Sherlock blinks as a story starts to build in his mind. Married? unhappily married 10 plus years. Carefully, Sherlock works the wedding ring off of the woman's finger and holds it up to look at the inside of the ring. While the outside of the ring is still registering as dirty, the inside registers as clean. As Sherlock lowers the ring and slides it back onto the woman's finger, he's already reached a conclusion about the ring. It's clearly regularly removed. Lifting his hands away from the woman, he looks down at her and makes his final deductions about her. Serial adulterer. Lestrade interrupts. Got anything? Not much. Standing up, Sherlock takes off his glove and gets his mobile phone out of his pocket and begins typing in it. Meanwhile, Anderson, who is casually leaning against the doorway, starts talking. She's German. Rache is German for revenge. She could be trying to tell us something. While he's speaking, though, Sherlock walks towards the door and closes it in Anderson's face while saying, "Yes, thank you for your input." He walks back into the room and on his phone, he's pulled up the menu for UK weather. The menu offers 5 options: maps, local warnings, next 24 hours, 7-day forecasts. He selects the maps option when Lestrade breaks the silence again. So she's German? Of course she's not German. She's from out of town though, intended to stay in London for one night. She intended to stay in London for one night before returning home to Cardiff. So far, so obvious. John looks at the man like he's completely insane. How is any of that obvious? But Lestrade is focused on something else. What about the message though? Sherlock ignores Lestrade and instead looks at John. "Dr. Watson, what do you think?" "Of the message? Of the body. You're a medical man." Lestrade interrupts. "Wait, no, we have a whole team right outside." "They won't work with me, Lestrade. I'm breaking every rule letting you in here, Sherlock." "Yes, because you need me." Lestrade stares at him for a couple moments and then gives up. John looks up from the body to Sherlock and then he turns his head towards Lestrade, silently seeking permission. "Oh, do as he says. Help yourself." Lestrade opens the door, going outside, and barks orders at Anderson to keep everyone out for a couple minutes. Sherlock and John walk over to the body. Sherlock squats down on one side of it and John painfully lowers himself to one knee on the other. Sherlock looks at John again. "Well, what am I doing here?" "Helping me make a point. I'm supposed to be helping you pay rent." "Yeah, well, this is more fun." "Fun? There's a woman laying dead." Perfectly sound analysis, John, but I was hoping you'd go deeper. Lestrade comes back into the room and stands there, so John drags his other leg down into a kneeling position and then leans forward to look more closely at the woman's body. He puts his head close to hers and sniffs, then he straightens a little bit before lifting her right hand and looking at the skin. He kneels up and looks across to Sherlock. "Yeah, asphyxiation, probably. Passed out, choked on her own vomit. Can't smell any alcohol on her. It could have been a seizure, possibly drugs. You know what it was. You've read the papers, John." "What? She's one of the suicides, the 4th. Lestrade butts in. "Sherlock, 2 minutes, I said. I need anything you've got." Victim is in her early 30s, professional person going by her clothes. I'm guessing something in the media, going frankly by the alarming shade of pink, traveled from Cardiff today, intended to stay in London for one night. It's obvious from the size of her suitcase. Suitcase? John looks around the room, but he can't see a suitcase anywhere. "Suitcase, yes, she's been married at least 10 years, but not happily. She has a string of lovers, but none of them knew that she was married." "Oh, for God's sake, if you're just making shit up." "Her wedding ring, 10 years old at least. The rest of her jewelry has been regularly cleaned, but not her wedding ring. State of her marriage right there. The inside of the ring is shinier than the outside. That means it's regularly removed. The only polishing it gets is when she works it off her finger. It's not for work. Look at her nails. She doesn't work with her hands, so what, or rather who, does she remove her rings for? Clearly not one lover. She'd never sustained the fiction of being single over that amount of time, so more likely a string of them. Simple." John can't help but let out like a small, admirable, "That's brilliant," as Lestrade continues. "Cardiff? It's obvious, isn't it?" When neither John nor Lestrade give any signs of it being obvious, he pauses to look at the two of them. "Dear God, what is it like in your funny little brains? It must be so boring." Her coat, it's slightly damp. She's been in heavy rain in the last few hours. No rain anywhere in London in that time. Under her coat collar, it's damp too. She's turned it up against the wind. She's got an umbrella in her left-hand pocket, but it's dry and unused. Not just wind, strong wind. Too strong for her to use her umbrella. We know from her suitcase that she was intending to stay overnight, so she must have come a decent distance, but she can't have traveled more than 2 or 3 hours because her coat still hasn't dried. So where has there been heavy rain and strong wind within radius of that travel time? He gets his phone from his pocket and shows the other two the webpage he was looking at earlier, displaying today's weather for the southern part of Britain. Cardiff. John lets out another "that's fantastic," and Lestrade turns the attention back to the suitcase. Why do you keep saying suitcase? Sherlock starts spinning around in circles, looking around the room. Yes, where is it? She must have had a phone or an organizer. Find out who Rachel is. She was writing Rachel? No, she was leaving an angry note in German. Of course she was writing Rachel. No other word it can be. Question is, why did she wait until she was dying to write it? How do you know she had a suitcase? Because of the right leg, tiny splash marks on the heel and the calf, not present on the left. She was dragging a wheeled suitcase behind her with her right hand. Don't get that splash pattern any other way. Smallish case going by the spread. Case that size, woman this clothes conscious could only be an overnight bag, so we know she was staying one night. Now where is it? What have you done with it? There was no case, Sherlock. Say that again? There wasn't a case. There was never any suitcase. Sherlock straightens up as he heads towards the door, yelling out about the suitcase to all the police officers in the house as he begins to hurry down the stairs. Lestrade and John follow him out, and Lestrade yells down the stairs, "Sherlock, there was no case." But they take the poison themselves, Lestrade. They chew, swallow the pills themselves. There are clear signs. Even you lot couldn't miss them. It's murder, all of them. I don't know how they're not suicides. They're killings, serial killings. We've got ourselves a serial killer. I love those. There's always something to look forward to. Why are you saying that? Her case, come on, where is her case? Did she eat it? Someone else was here and they took her case, so the killer must have driven her here, forgot the case was in the car. John points out that maybe she checked into a hotel, left her case there. No, she never got to the hotel. Look at her hair. She color coordinates her lipstick and her shoes. She'd never have left any hotel with her hair looking like... Oh, his eyes widen and his face lights up. He claps his hands together in delight. Serial killers are always hard. We have to wait for them to make a mistake. We can't just wait, Sherlock. Oh, we're done waiting. Look at her. Really, look. We have a mistake. Get on to Cardiff, find out who Jennifer Wilson's family and friends are. Find Rachel. Sherlock at this point has reached the bottom of the stairs and disappears from view, but Lestrade is still struggling to follow along. Of course, yeah, but what mistake? Sherlock comes back into view, runs up a couple stairs so that he can be seen before he stops and yells up to Lestrade, "Pink!" While Sherlock hurries off, Lestrade goes back into the room with Anderson and his team. John, however, is left standing there, forgotten by everyone else. He slowly makes his way down the stairs. He removes his coveralls and walks out onto the street. Looking around, Sherlock is long gone. Donovan is the only one he recognizes. She points him to the main road so that he can get a taxi, but as John starts walking away, she calls after him. "You're not his friend. He doesn't have friends, so who are you?" I'm nobody. I just met him." "Okay, bit of advice then. Stay away from that guy." "Why?" "You know why he's here, right? He's not paid or anything. He likes it. He gets off on it. The weirder the crime, the more he gets off. And you know what? One day, just showing up won't be enough. One day, we'll be standing around a body and Sherlock Holmes will be the one who put it there." "Why would he do that?" "Because he's a psychopath, and psychopaths get bored." Donovan gets called away by Lestrade, leaving John with one last warning. Stay away from Sherlock Holmes. John watches her go for a moment and then turns and begins to make his way down the road. To his right, the phone in a public telephone box begins to ring. He stops and looks at it for a few seconds and then looks down at his watch. He shakes his head and continues down the road. When he's out of earshot, the phone stops ringing. He tries to hail a taxi on the main street, but it passes by him, and he's standing outside a fast food restaurant looking for another one when the payphone on the wall begins to ring. He turns and looks as one of the serving staff walks over to it, but as the staff reaches for the phone, it stops. John walks down the road and shortly afterwards approaches another public telephone box. The phone inside starts to ring, and now he's starting to question if maybe that call is for him. He pulls out the door, goes inside, and answers the phone. A man's voice comes through. "There's a security camera on the building to your left. Do you see it?" "Who's this? Who's speaking?" "Do you see the camera, Dr. Watson?" John looks through the window of the telephone booth at a CCTV camera high up on a wall of a nearby building. "Yeah, I see it. Watch." The camera, which was pointed directly at the phone box until now, starts turning away. "There's another camera on the building opposite you. Do you see it?" As John looks at the camera that is staring at him, it too swivels away. And finally, at the top of the building on your right, John stares up into the third camera to see it turning away from him. "How are you doing this?" Get into the car, Dr. Watson. A black car pulls up at the curbside near the phone booth. The driver gets out and opens the rear door as the man on the phone continues. I would make some sort of threat, but I'm sure your situation is quite clear to you. The phone goes dead and John stays in the booth thinking, and I guess he decides that there's nothing else he can do, so he turns around, leaves the box, and gets into the car. An attractive young woman is sitting beside him. Her eyes are fixed onto her phone. She's pretty much ignoring his entire existence. John tries to make conversation. Hello. The woman smiles at him. Hi. What's your name then? Anthea? Is that your real name? No. I'm John. Yes, I know. Any point in asking where I'm going? None at all, John. They sit in silence as the car pulls into an almost empty warehouse. A man in a suit is standing in the center of the area, leaning nonchalantly on an umbrella while he watches John get out. In front of the man is a chair, and the man gestures to it with the point of his umbrella as John limps towards him. Have a seat, Dr. Watson. You know, I've got a phone. I mean, very clever and all, but you could have just phoned me on my phone. Instead of sitting on the chair, John walks straight past it and instead chooses to stop a few paces in front of the man. When one is avoiding the attention of Sherlock Holmes, one learns to be discreet, hence this place. The leg must be hurting you. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. You don't seem very afraid, Dr. Watson. You don't seem very frightening. Ah, yes, the bravery of the soldier. Bravery is by far the kindest word for stupidity, don't you think? What is your connection to Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson? I don't have one. I barely know him. I met him yesterday. Since yesterday, you've moved in with him and now you're solving crimes together? Might we expect a happy announcement by the end of the week? Who are you? An interested party? Interested in Sherlock? Why, I'm guessing you're not friends. You've met him. How many friends do you imagine he has? I'm the closest thing to a friend that Sherlock Holmes is capable of having. And what's that? An enemy. An enemy? In his mind, certainly. If you were to ask him, he'd probably say his arch enemy. He loves to be dramatic. John looks around at the warehouse because, you know, this is like the brand of an overly dramatic evil villain. Well, thank God you're above all that. The man frowns at him, and just then, John's phone pings. He digs into his pocket and takes out his phone. It's a message that reads, Baker Street, come at once if convenient, S.H. The whole scene is a little strange. John just got kidnapped, but he's not even the least bit frightened. And this man is weirdly funny. As John is looking at his phone, the man who is supposed to be the villain goes, I hope I'm not distracting you. Not distracting me at all, sir. Do you plan to continue your association with Sherlock Holmes? I could be wrong, sir, but I think that's none of your business. It could be. It really couldn't. The man takes out a notebook from his suit pocket and consults it as he speaks. If you'd move into 221B Baker Street, I'd be happy to pay a meaningful sum of money on a regular basis to ease your way. Why? Because you're not a wealthy man, Dr. Watson. In exchange for what? Information. Nothing indiscreet, nothing you'd feel uncomfortable with. Just tell me what he's up to. Why? I worry about him constantly, but I would prefer for various reasons that my concern goes unmentioned. We have what you might call a difficult relationship. John's phone beeps again. It's another text. If inconvenient, come anyway, S.H. John responds to the man's offer with a big, bold no, but I haven't mentioned a figure. Don't bother. You're very loyal very quickly, Dr. Watson. No, I'm not. I'm just not interested. The man looks at him closely for a moment and then opens his notebook again. Trust issues, it says here. Could it be that you've decided to trust Sherlock Holmes of all people? Who says I trust him? You don't seem the kind to make friends easily, Dr. Watson. Are we done? You tell me. John looks at him for a long moment, then turns his back on him and starts walking away. The man calls after him. I imagine people have already warned you to stay away from him, but I can see from your left hand that's not going to happen. John stops dead in his tracks, his shoulders tense, and he angrily shakes his head before turning around to face the man. My what? Show me. He nods towards John's left hand as he speaks, and then he plants the tip of his umbrella on the floor and casually leans on it. John, however, doesn't get intimidated and digs his feet in underneath him. He then raises his left hand, bending it at the elbow and standing still. His message is clear. If the man wants to look at his hand, he'll have to come to him. The man strolls forward. John pulls his hand back a little bit. Don't. The man lowers his hand and raises his eyebrows at John. John very reluctantly puts up his hand with his palm facing down. The man takes it in both of his own hands and looks at it closely. Remarkable. John pulls his hand back. What is? Most people blunder around this city, and all they see are streets and shops and cars. When you walk with Sherlock Holmes, you see the battlefield. You've seen it already, haven't you? What's wrong with my hand? You have an intermittent tremor in your left hand. Your therapist thinks it's post-traumatic stress disorder. She thinks you're haunted by memories of your military service. Who the hell are you? How do you know that? Fire her, Dr. Watson. She's got it the wrong way around. You're under stress right now and your hand is perfectly steady. John's eyes flicker downwards before returning to stare at the man. You're not haunted by war, Dr. Watson. You miss it. He leans closer to him. Welcome back. He turns and starts walking away just as John's phone rings as another text appears. The man casually twirls his umbrella as he says, "Time to choose a side, Dr. Watson." John stands fixed in the spot for a few seconds, then turns and glances towards the departing man. Behind John, the car door opens and Anthea gets out and walks a few paces towards him. Her attention is still completely on the phone in her hands. "I'm to take you home." John half turns towards her, then stops and takes out his phone to look at the new message. It reads, "Could be dangerous, SH." John pockets his phone before holding out his left hand in front of him, studying the lack of tremor coming from it. Anthea, however, interrupts his study. Address? Baker Street, 221B Baker Street, but I need to drop off somewhere before. That somewhere is his studio apartment. He walks inside, goes across to his desk, opens a drawer, and takes out his gun. He checks the clip and then tucks the gun into the back of the waistband of his jeans and leaves. The car pulls up outside of 221B Baker Street, and John turns to look at Anthea, who is still glued to her phone. "Listen, your boss, any chance you could not tell him this is where I went?" "Sure. You've told him already, haven't you?" "Yeah." John sighs and turns to get out of the car, but just as he opens the door, he turns back to her. "Hey, do you have any free time?" "Oh, yeah, lots." John waits expectantly, but she continues looking at her phone for a long moment, then turns and looks at him. "Bye." "Okay." He gets out and watches as the car pulls away before turning and walking across the road to the front door of 221B. He knocks because it's not like this is his apartment too, right? Upstairs in the living room of the flat, Sherlock is laying stretched out on the sofa with his head towards the window, resting on a cushion. His jacket is off, his sleeves are unbuttoned and pushed up to his arms, and he has his eyes closed. After a few seconds, his eyes snap open and he stares towards the ceiling and then sighs. John stares as Sherlock repeatedly clenches and unclenches his fists. "What are you doing?" "Nicotine patch. Helps me think. Impossible to sustain a smoking habit in London these days. Bad news for brain work. It's good news for breathing." "Oh, breathing. Breathing's boring. Is that 3 patches? It's a 3-patch problem." "Well, you asked me to come. I'm assuming it's important." Sherlock doesn't respond for a while, but eventually his eyes open and without looking at John, he makes a request. "Can I borrow your phone? Don't want to use mine. Always a chance the number will be recognized." "Mrs. Hudson's got a phone, Sherlock." "Yeah, she's downstairs. I tried shouting, but she didn't hear." "I was on the other side of London." There was no hurry. John glares at Sherlock before pulling out his phone. "So what's this about the case?" Her case. Her case. Her suitcase. Yeah, obviously the murderer took the suitcase. First big mistake. Okay, he took her case. So it's no use. There's no other way. We'll have to risk it. He holds the phone out towards John. "On my desk, there's a number. I want you to send a text." "You brought me here to send a text." "Text, yes, the number on my desk." John looks at Sherlock like he's contemplating if he can get away with homicide, but eventually he stomps across the room and snatches the phone from Sherlock's hand. But instead of going to the table, John goes over to the window and looks out into the street below. "What's wrong, John?" "Just met a friend of yours." "A friend? An enemy?" Oh, which one? Your arch enemy, according to him. Do people have arch enemies? Did he offer you money to spy on me? Yes. Did you take it? No. Pity. We could have split the fee. Think it through next time. Who is he, Sherlock? The most dangerous man you've ever met, and not my problem right now. On my desk, the number. John walks over to the desk and picks up a piece of paper. He looks at the name on the paper. Jennifer Wilson. That was... Hang on, wasn't that the dead woman? Yes, that's not important. Just enter the number. Are you doing it? Yes. Have you done it? Yes. Hang on. Type these words exactly. What happened at Lauriston Gardens? I must have blacked out. 22 Northumberland Street. Please come. John has gotten as far as what happened at Lauriston Gardens. I must have blacked. Before he stops and then turns to look at Sherlock. You blacked out? What? No, type and send it quickly. Sherlock goes into the kitchen and picks up a small pink suitcase from a chair and brings it back into the living room. He sets it down near the fireplace. Have you sent it, John? What's the address? 22 Northumberland Street. Hurry up. John finishes the message, then looks at Sherlock as he flips open the lid to the suitcase. There's a few clothing items and underwear, all in varying shades of pink, a wash bag, and a paperback novel by Paul Bunch. John turns towards the case and staggers in shock when he realizes what he's looking at. That's the pink lady's case. That's Jennifer Wilson's case. Yes, obviously. Oh, perhaps I should mention I didn't kill her. I never said you did. Why not? Given the text I had you send and the fact that I have her case, it's a pretty logical assumption. Do people usually assume you're the murderer? Now and then. Okay, how did you get this? By looking. Where? The killer must have driven her to Lauriston Gardens. He could only keep her case by accident if it was already in the car. Nobody could be seen with this case without drawing attention, particularly a man, which is statistically more likely. So obviously he'd feel compelled to get rid of it the moment he noticed he still had it. Wouldn't have taken him more than 5 minutes to realize his mistake. I checked every back street wide enough for a car 5 minutes from Lauriston Gardens, and anywhere you could dispose of a bulky object without being observed. It took me less than an hour to find the right skip. Pink. You got all that because you realized the case would be pink. Well, it had to be pink, obviously. While Sherlock is going on about this, John looks like me when Wordle first blew up. He's sitting there like, why didn't I think of that? But John is unlike me in that he voiced that out loud, that thought out loud, with Sherlock right next to him. So Sherlock responds, because you're an idiot. John looks at him startled, but Sherlock waves him off. Oh, no, don't look at me like that. Practically everyone is. Now look, do you see what's missing? From the case? How could I? Her phone, John. Where is her mobile phone? There was no phone on the body and there's no phone in the case. We know she had one. That's the number that you were just texting. Maybe she left it at home. She has a string of lovers and she's careful about it. She never leaves her phone at home. Why did I just send that text? Well, the question is, where is her phone now? She could have lost it. Yes, or... the murderer. You think the murderer has the phone. Maybe she left it when she left her case. Maybe he took it from her for some reason. Either way, the balance of probability is the murderer has her phone. Sorry, what are we doing? Did I just send a text to a murderer? What good will that do? And it's almost as if there's a method to Sherlock's madness because John's phone starts ringing. And sure enough, the caller ID is withheld. He looks across to Sherlock as the phone continues to ring. Sherlock begins to explain. A few hours after his last victim, and now he receives a text that can only be from her. If somebody had just found the phone, they'd ignore the text like that, but the murderer would panic. Sherlock heads towards the door as John called after him. Have you talked to the police? 4 people are dead. There's no time to talk to the police, John. So why are you talking to me? Sherlock reaches behind the door to take his coat off the hook. He turns to look at John and raises a brow. Well, what? Well, you could just sit there and watch telly. What, you want me to come with you? I like company when I go out, and I think better when I talk out loud. So, any problem, John? Yes, Sergeant Donovan. What about her? She said you get off on this, you enjoy it. And I said dangerous, and here you are. Sherlock leaves and John sits there for a few seconds. He thinks about it before he leans back onto his cane and pushes himself to his feet and marches out the door. Where are we going, Sherlock? Northumberland Street's a 5-minute walk from here. You think he's stupid enough to go there? No, I think he's brilliant enough. I love the brilliant ones. They're always so desperate to get caught. Why? Appreciation, applause, at long last the spotlight. That's the frailty of genius, John. It needs an audience. This is his hunting ground, right here in the heart of the city. Now we know his victims were abducted. That changes everything, because all of his victims disappeared from busy streets, crowded places, but nobody saw them go. Think, who do we trust even though we don't know them? Who passes unnoticed wherever they go? Who hunts in the middle of a crowd? Who? Haven't the faintest idea. Hungry? Sherlock leads John into a small restaurant. The waiter near the door clearly knows him and gestures to a reserved table at the front window. John sits down on the other seat with his back to the window. Sherlock nods to a building across the street, 22 Umberland Street. Keep your eyes on it. He isn't just gonna ring the doorbell though, is he? He'd need to be mad. He's killed 4 people, John. The manager of the restaurant comes over, clearly pleased to see Sherlock. Sherlock, anything on the menu, whatever you want, free, on the house, for you and for your date. John rushes to clarify that this isn't a date, but the restaurant owner, Angelo, doesn't care. Instead, he talks about how Sherlock got him off a murder charge, and Sherlock is more than happy to divulge more details. 3 years ago, I successfully proved to Lestrade at the time of particularly vicious triple murder that Angelo was in a completely different part of town, housebreaking. Sherlock asks Angelo if anything happened in the house opposite the road. Angelo shakes his head no before turning back to John. But for this man, I'd have gone to prison. I'll get a candle for the table. It's more romantic. John yells after him that this isn't a date, but Angelo doesn't believe him, and Sherlock doesn't even try to correct the misconception. As John digs in, Sherlock's attention is fixed out the window. He's quietly drumming his fingers on the table when John starts a conversation. People don't have arch enemies. I'm sorry? In real life, there are no arch enemies in real life. Doesn't happen. Doesn't it? Sounds a bit dull. So who did I meet? Who do real people have then in their real lives? Friends? People they know? People they like? People they don't like? Girlfriends? Boyfriends? Yes, well, as I was saying, dull. You don't have a girlfriend then? Girlfriend? No. Oh, right. Do you have a boyfriend? Which is fine, by the way. I know it's fine. So you've got a boyfriend then? No. Right. Okay, you're unattached like me. Fine, good. Sherlock looks at him suspiciously for a moment, but then turns his attention out the window again. And then he replays John's statement in his head, and his expression turns startled. John, I think you should know that I consider myself married to my work, and while I'm flattered by your interest, I'm really not looking for any... No, I'm not asking. I was just saying it's all fine. Good. Thank you. Sherlock turns his attention back to the street while John sits there finding the whole situation funny. And then what they're waiting for happens. A taxi pulls up to the curb, but nobody gets in and nobody gets out. Is anyone else having deja vu to the Flower of Evil episodes? In the rear seat of the taxi, a passenger is looking through the side window. As if he's trying to look for someone particular, Sherlock is sitting in the restaurant wondering to himself, why a taxi? Oh, that's clever. Is it clever? Why is it clever? Sherlock suddenly gets to his feet and rushes out the door. John picks up his coat and follows after him, but he completely forgets to take his walking cane with him. Outside, Sherlock shrugs himself into a coat while keeping his eyes glued to the taxi. The passenger continues to look around and then turns and looks out the back window. His gaze lands on Sherlock, and then the man turns forward and the taxi begins to pull away from the curb. Sherlock runs towards it without bothering to check the road that he's running into and is almost run over by a car. The driver slams on the brakes as Sherlock simply slides across the car's bonnet. As the driver angrily sounds his horn, John puts out a hand on the bonnet and vaults over the front of the car, apologizing. He then chases after Sherlock, running full speed without his cane. Sherlock realizes that they can't catch up to the taxi like this, so he stops and calls up a mental map of the local area. He overlays it with images of the street along with the routes which he calculates that the taxi must take. Having worked out the route, he lifts his head and sees a man unlocking the door to a nearby building. Instantly, his mind flashes alternative route. He races towards the man, grabs him, shoving him out of the way before charging into the building. John is hot on his heels as he says sorry to the man, and the two of them race up and out onto a metal metal spiral staircase fire exit thing leading up to the roof. They run up, leap across roofs, run down alleyways, miss the taxi by a bit, run down some more alleyways, and finally catch the taxi just as it turns the corner. Sherlock throws himself in the taxi's path, preventing it from going any further, and then pulls out an ID badge and flashes it at the driver as he runs to the right-hand side of the cab. He pulls the door open and stares at the passenger, who looks back at him anxiously, and a millisecond later, Sherlock straightens up in exasperation. No, teeth, tan, what, Californian, LA, Santa Monica, just arrived? John is once again baffled. How could you possibly know that? The luggage, and sure enough, there's a suitcase on the floor of the cab, and its luggage label is showing that the man has flown from LAX to LHR. It's probably your first trip to London, right? Going by your final destination and the route the cabbie was taking you. Sorry, are you guys the police? Yeah, he flashes his ID badge again, and John sends the passenger off before making his way to where Sherlock is standing and starts trying to process everything. Basically, just the cab that happened to slow down. Basically, not the murderer then. No, not the murderer. John then reaches for Sherlock's ID card. Hey, where did you get this? Here, Detective Inspector Lestrade's badge? Yeah, I pickpocket him when he's annoying. You can keep that one. I've got plenty at the flat. They joke around for a bit before they notice that a police officer has stopped the taxi in the middle of the street. The passenger is pointing down the road towards John and Sherlock, and the two of them look at each other. Got your breath back, John? And they head off into the sunset. Just kidding. It's the dead of night. There's no sunset. They make their way back to 221B Baker Street, completely out of breath. John leans against the wall, trying to slow down his heart rate. Okay, that was ridiculous. The most ridiculous thing I've ever done. And you've invaded Afghanistan. That wasn't just me, Sherlock. Why aren't we back at the restaurant? Sherlock waves his hand dismissively. Oh, they can just keep an eye out. It's a long shot anyway. So what were we doing there? Oh, just passing the time and proving a point. What point? You. Mrs. Hudson, Dr. Watson will take the room upstairs. Says who? Says the man at the door. John turns to look at the front door just in time to hear someone knock on it. He turns back to look at Sherlock and then answers the door to find Angelo, the restaurant manager, standing outside. Sherlock texted me. He said you'd forgot this, and he holds up John's walking cane, and John takes it in a state of utter shock. Thank you. As John is coming back, Mrs. Hudson comes out of her flat and hurries over to the boys. She's upset. Sherlock, what have you done upstairs? They hurry up the stairs to find Lestrade sitting casually on one of the armchairs. Other police officers are going through all of Sherlock's possessions. What are you doing? Well, I knew you'd find the case. I'm not stupid. You can't just break into my flat, and you can't withhold evidence. And I didn't break into your flat. Well, what do you call this then? Lestrade looks around at his officers before looking back at Sherlock innocently. It's a drugs bust. Seriously? This guy a junkie? Have you met him? Sherlock walks towards John nervously and tries to get John's attention, but John is not paying attention to him. I'm pretty sure you could search this flat all day and you wouldn't find anything you could call recreational. John, you probably want to shut up now. Yeah, but come on. No. You? And to make matters worse for Sherlock, Anderson is there as well. In fact, every police officer that's making their way through Sherlock's home are people that hate him. Lestrade's deal is simple. Either Sherlock works with them the way he was meant to, or he gets put away for drugs. Also, turns out that Lestrade and his team found Rachel. She's Jennifer Wilson's only daughter. But Sherlock's confused. Her daughter? Why would she write her daughter's name? Why? But instead of that question being answered, Anderson points out the pink case. Never mind that, we found the case. According to someone, the murderer has the case, and we found it in the hands of our favorite psychopath. I'm not a psychopath, Anderson. I'm a high-functioning sociopath. Do your research. You need to bring Rachel in. You need to question her. I need to question her. She's dead, Sherlock. Excellent. How, when, and why? Is there a connection? There has to be. Well, I doubt it, since she's been dead for 14 years. Technically, she was never alive. Rachel was Jennifer Wilson's stillborn daughter 14 years ago. No, that's not right. Why would she do that? Why? Anderson can't help but quip. Why would she think of her daughter in her last moments? Yep. Sociopath, I'm seeing it now. She didn't think about her daughter, you imbecile. She scratched her name on the floor with her fingernails. She was dying. It took effort. It would have hurt. John has an idea. You said that the victims all took the poison themselves, that he makes them take it. Well, maybe he, I don't know, talks to them. Maybe he uses the death of her daughter somehow. Yeah, but that was ages ago. Why would she still be upset? John pauses. In fact, everyone in the apartment pauses. Sherlock glances awkwardly at John. Not good. Bit not good. Yeah, but if you were dying, if you'd been murdered in your very last few seconds, what would you say? Please, God, save me. Oh, use your imagination, John. I don't have to, Sherlock. Sherlock looks a little sad and awkward for a couple seconds before going back to his point. Yeah, but if you were clever, really clever. Jennifer Wilson running all those levers, she was clever. She's trying to tell us something. Just then, Mrs. Hudson comes in. Isn't the doorbell working? Your taxi's here, Sherlock. I didn't order a taxi, Mrs. Hudson. Go away. Oh dear, they're making a mess. What are you all looking for? It's a drugs bust, Mrs. Hudson. But they're just for my hip. They're herbal soothers. Shut up, everybody. Shut up. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't breathe. I'm trying to think. Anderson, face the other way. You're putting me off. Mrs. Hudson is the only one who dares speak up again. What about your taxi? Sherlock turns and shouts at her, but then stops as he finally realizes something. Oh, she was clever, yes, she was cleverer than you lot, and she's dead. Do you see? Do you get it? She didn't lose her phone, never lost it. She planted it on him. When she got out of the car, she knew she was going to her death. She left the phone in order to lead us to the killer. But how? What do you mean how? Rachel, don't you see? Rachel! When everyone still looks kind of blank, Sherlock laughs in disbelief. Oh, look at you lot. You're all so vacant. Isn't it nice to not be me? It must be so relaxing. Rachel is not a name. John, on the luggage, there's a label, email address. jenny.pink@megaphone.org.uk. Sherlock is furiously typing that into his laptop. Oh, I've been too slow. She didn't have a laptop, which means she did her business on her phone. So it's a smartphone. It's email enabled. So there was a website for her account. Her username is her full email address, and altogether the password is... John walks up to stand behind him as he says, Rachel. Anderson, meanwhile, voices another thought. So we can read her emails. So what? Anderson, don't talk out loud. You lower the IQ of the whole street. We can do so much more than just load her emails. It's a smartphone. It's got GPS, which means if you lose it, you can locate it online. She's leading us directly to the man who killed her, unless he got rid of the phone. But that's not possible because remember, John sent a text and the murderer called them back. Sherlock is staring at the screen impatiently as Mrs. Hudson walks in again. Sherlock, dear, the taxi driver. Sherlock walks towards her and tells her off as John sits down on the chair he just vacated. Sherlock turns towards Lestrade. We need to get vehicles. Get a helicopter. Mrs. Hudson looks around anxiously as a man walks slowly up the stairs behind her. Sherlock, however, is barking orders at Lestrade. We're going to have to move fast. This phone battery won't last forever. John, who had been watching the laptop until now, suddenly calls out to Sherlock, but Sherlock is still too busy with Lestrade. It narrows it down from just anyone in London. It's the first proper lead we've had. John calls out again, so finally he walks over. What is it? Quickly, where? It's here, Sherlock. It's in 221 Baker Street. How could it be here? How? Lestrade points out that maybe it's in the case when he bought it back and it fell out somewhere, but Sherlock doesn't believe it. How could someone like him not notice something like that? And John quickly adds that they texted the number and it called back. Sherlock, in the meantime, is hyper-focused. He's thinking about people who you can trust, even if you don't know them. Who passes unnoticed wherever they go? Who hunts in the middle of a crowd? Behind Mrs. Hudson, the man has reached the top of the stairs. He's wearing a cardigan with a little cap on his head obscuring his face. He has a badge and a leather holder on a cord around his neck for a licensed London cab driver. And we see a whole bunch of flashbacks. One where Sir Geoffrey Patterson walks to a cab rank and raises his hand for a taxi. Another where James Fillmore walks alone across the street, huddled against the pouring rain, and a vacant taxi drives along the road beside him, where Beth Davenport looks around when she realizes that she doesn't have her keys. Nearby, a vacant cab pulls up, and finally, one where Jennifer Wilson arrives at the London airport terminal and gets into the back of a taxi. As Sherlock is still pushing everything together in his head, the taxi driver behind Mrs. Hudson takes a pink smartphone from his pocket and presses the screen to send a text. next. A moment later, Sherlock's phone pings with a message that reads, "Come with me." Sherlock turns his head towards the door and watches as the taxi driver turns around and calmly heads off down the stairs. John comes up next to Sherlock. "Sherlock, you okay?" "What? Yeah, I'm fine. So how can the phone be here?" "Dunno." John gets his phone out of his pocket. "I'll try texting it again." "Good idea." And then he starts walking towards the door. "Where are you going?" "Fresh air, just popping outside for a moment, won't be long." "You're sure you're all right?" "I'm fine, John." Downstairs, Sherlock opens the front door and stands on the doorstep looking at the driver, Jeff, who is casually leaning against the side of his cab. "Taxi for Sherlock Holmes?" "I didn't order a taxi." "Doesn't mean you don't need one, sir. You're the cabbie, the one who stopped outside Northumberland Street. It was you, not the passenger." "See, nobody ever thinks about the cabbie. It's like you're invisible, just the back of a head. Proper advantage for a serial killer." "Is this a confession?" "Oh yeah, and I'll tell you what else. You can call the Coopers now. I won't run. I'll sit down and they can take me down, I promise." "Why?" "'Cause you're not gonna do that." "Am I not?" "I didn't kill those 4 people, Mr. Holmes. I spoke to them and they killed themselves. And if you get the coppers now, I promise you one thing. I will never tell you what I said." "No one else will die, though. I believe that is what they call a result." Jeff turns around and gets into the driver's seat. Biting his lip, Sherlock walks closer to the cab, looking up at the flat, and then he bends and looks into the open window of the cab. "If I wanted to understand, what would I do? Let me take you for a ride. So you can kill me too?" "I don't want to kill you, Mr. Holmes. I'm just gonna talk to you, and then you're gonna kill yourself." Sherlock straightens up, his eyes lost in thought as he considers the situation. Jeff calmly sits gazing out the front window and then smiles in satisfaction when the rear door opens. Upstairs, John has his phone held to his ear as he's looking out the window as he watches the cab pull away. He immediately alerts Donovan. "It's Sherlock. He just drove off in a cab." "I told you he does that. He bloody left again. We're wasting our time." John is still calling the phone, but no one can hear the ringing in the apartment, meaning the phone isn't here. John goes back to the computer to search for the signal again, but Donovan is done. Does it matter? Does any of it? You know he's just a lunatic and he'll always let you down, and you're wasting your time, all our time. Lestrade holds out for a few more seconds before he sighs and tells everyone to pack up. In the cab, Sherlock is making small talk. "How did you find me?" "Oh, I recognized you as soon as I saw you chasing my cab. Sherlock Holmes. I was warned about you. I've been on your website too. Brilliant stuff. I loved it." "Who warned you about me?" "Just someone out there who's noticed you." "What?" Sherlock leans forward, looking closely at the side of Jeff's neck, and then he sees a photograph of a young boy and girl attached to the dashboard of the cab. "Who would notice me?" "You're too modest, Mr. Holmes. You've got yourself a fan." Back at the flat, as the other police officers leave, Lestrade picks up his coat and turns to John. "Why do you have to do that? Why do you have to leave?" "You know him better than I do, sir. I've known him for 5 years, and no, I don't." "So why do you put up with him?" "Because I'm desperate, that's why. And because Sherlock Holmes is a great man, and I think one day, if we're very lucky, he might even be a good one." Back at the cab, the two have finally stopped in front of 2 identical buildings side by side. Jeff turns off the engine and gets out, coming to the back door and opening it. "Where are we?" "You know every street in London. You know exactly where we are, Mr. Holmes." "Ronald Kerr Further Education College. But why here?" "It's open, cleaners are in. One thing about being a cabbie, you always know a quiet spot for a murder. I'm surprised more of us don't branch out." "And you just walk your victims in? How?" Jeff raises a gun and points it at Sherlock. Sherlock rolls his eyes and turns his head away. "Oh, dull. Don't worry, it gets better. You can't make people take their own lives at gunpoint." "I don't. It's much better than that. Don't need this with you, because you'll follow." Jeff walks away because he knows Sherlock will follow him. Sherlock sits for a moment, trying his best to hold back his compulsive need to know what Jeff said to his victims, but he lasts about a millisecond before getting out of the cab. Back at 221B Baker Street, John is alone in the flat looking at the phone tracking website. The clock is spinning on the screen while the site searches for Jennifer Wilson's phone. John picks up the cane and heads for the door again. The computer beeps and a map appears on screen. screen and then starts to zoom in on the new location of the phone. John turns back to the table, picks up the laptop, looks at the screen, and then takes the laptop with him as he hurries out the door, once again forgetting to take his cane. At Ronald Kerr College, Jeff opens the door to a room and stands aside so that Sherlock can go inside. The men are in a large classroom which is fixed with large wooden benches. Well, what do you think? Sherlock raises his hands and shrugs like, what do I think about what? It's up to you. You're the one who's gonna die here. No, I'm not. That's what they all say. Shall we talk? Without waiting for a reply, Jeff pulls out one of his chairs and sits down. Sherlock takes the chair from the bench in front, flips it around, and sits down opposite. He sighs dramatically while he takes off his gloves and puts them in his coat pocket. Bit risky, wasn't it? Took me away under the eye of about a dozen cops. They're not that stupid, and Miss Hudson will remember your face. You call that a risk? Nah, this is a risk. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small glass bottle and puts it onto the table in front of him. There is a single large pill inside. Ooh, I like this bit, because you don't get it yet, do you? But you're about to. I just have to do this. He reaches into his pocket and takes out an identical bottle containing an identical pill and puts it onto the table beside the first bottle. You weren't expecting that, were you? Oh, you're gonna love this. Sherlock Holmes, look at you, in the flesh. The website of yours your fan told me about. You're brilliant. You are a proper genius. The science of deduction. Now that is proper thinking. Between you and me sitting here, why can't people think? Doesn't it make you mad? Why can't people just think? Oh, I see. You're a proper genius too. Don't look it, do I? Funny little man driving a cab, but you'll know better in a minute. Chances are I'll be the last thing you'll ever know. Okay, 2 bottles. Explain. There's a good bottle and a bad bottle. You take the pill from the good bottle, you live. Take the pill from the bad bottle, you die. Both bottles, of course, are identical in every way, and you know which is which. Of course I know, but I don't. Wouldn't be a game if you knew. You're the one who chooses. Why should I? You've got nothing on me. What's in it for me? I haven't told you the best bit yet. Whatever bottle you choose, I take the pill from the other one, and then together we take our medicine. I won't cheat. It's your choice. I'll take whatever pill you don't want. Didn't expect that, did you, Mr. Holmes? This is what you did to the rest of them. You gave them a choice. And now I'm giving you one. You take your time, get yourself together. I want your best game. Jeff licks his lips in anticipation as Sherlock looks up at him. It's not a game, it's chance. I've played 4 times. I'm alive. It's not chance, Mr. Holmes. With his left hand, he slides the bottle across the table towards Sherlock. Did I just give you the good bottle or the bad bottle? You can choose either one. John, meanwhile, is in the back of a taxi. He has the laptop open on his lap and is holding his phone to his ear. No, Detective Inspector Lestrade, I need to speak to him. It's important. It's an emergency. Back with Jeff, he's getting a little impatient. You ready yet, Mr. Holmes? Ready to play? Play what? It's a 50-50 chance. You're not playing the numbers, you're playing me. Did I just give you the good pill or the bad pill? Is it a bluff or a double bluff or a triple bluff? Still just chance, Jeff. 4 people in a row. It's not chance. It's genius. I know how people think. I know how people think. I can see it all like a map inside my head. Everyone's so stupid, even you. Or maybe God just loves me. John gets out of the cab at Roland Kerr College. He looks at the 2 identical buildings in front of him, and it's clear that the map isn't precise enough to indicate exactly where the phone is. After a moment, he makes up his choice and heads towards one of the buildings. In the classroom, Sherlock gazes intensely at Jeff. So you risked your life 4 times just to kill strangers. Why? But instead of answering, Jeff nods down to the bottles. Time to play. Oh, I am playing. This is my turn. There's some shaving foam behind your left ear. Nobody's pointed that out to you. Traces of where it happened before, so obviously you live on your own. There's no one to tell you, but there's a photograph of children. The child's mother has been cut out of the picture. If she died, she'd still be there. The photograph's old, but the frame's new. You think of your children, but you don't get to see them. Estranged father. She took the kids, but you still love them, and it still hurts. Ah, but there's more. Your clothes, recently laundered, but everything you're wearing at least 3 years old, keeping up appearances but not planning ahead. And here you are on a kamikaze murder spree. What's that about? Ah, 3 years ago. Is that when they told you? Told me what? Sherlock's deduction appears beside Jeff's head. That you're a dead man walking. So are you. You don't have long, though, am I right? Aneurysm. He lifts his right hand and taps to the right side of his head. Right in here. Any breath could be my last. And because you're dying, you've just murdered 4 people? I've outlived 4 people. That's the most fun you can have on an aneurysm. No, there's something else. You didn't just kill 4 people because you're bitter. Bitterness is paralytic. Love is a much more vicious motivator. Somehow this is about your children. Ooh, you are good, ain't you? When I die, they won't get much, my kids. Not a lot of money in driving cabs. Or serial killing. You'd be surprised. I have a sponsor. You have a what? For every life I take, money goes to my kids. The more I kill, the better off they'll be. You see, it's nicer than you think. Who'd sponsor a serial killer? Who'd be a fan of Sherlock Holmes? You're not the only one to enjoy a good murder. There's others out there just like you, except you're just a man, and they're so much more than that. What do you mean, more than a man? An organization? What? There's a name no one says, and I'm not going to say it either. Now, enough clatter. Time to choose. Sherlock looks down at the bottles, his eyes move from one to the other. Elsewhere in the college, John is running through the corridors, calling out Sherlock's name. He runs from door to door, tries to open them, and peers in through the windows, but John's screams are not reaching Sherlock's ears. Sherlock's busy participating in a death game. What if I don't choose? I could just walk out of here. Sighing in a combination of exasperation and disappointment, Jeff lifts his pistol and points it at Sherlock. You can take your 50-50 chance, or I can shoot you in the head. Funnily enough, no one's ever gone for that option. I'll have the gun, please. Are you sure? Definitely, the gun. You don't want to phone a friend? The gun. Jeff's mouth tightens and slowly he squeezes the trigger, and a small flame bursts out the end of the muzzle. It's a freaking cigarette lighter in the shape of a gun. I know a real gun when I see one. None of the other ones did. Clearly. Well, this has been very interesting. I look forward to the court case. Sherlock stands up and starts walking away. Just before you go, did you figure it out? Which one's the good bottle? Sherlock stops at the door and turns towards him. Of course, child's play. Well, which one then? Which one would you have picked? Just so I know whether I could have beaten you. Come on, play the game. Slowly, Sherlock walks back towards him, and when he gets to the table, he reaches out and sweeps up the bottle nearest to Jeff, then walks past him. Jeff picks up the bottle on the desk and tips a pill out onto his hand. He holds it up, looks at it closely, while Sherlock examines his own. So, what do you think? Shall we? Really, what do you think? Can you beat me? Are you clever enough to bet your life? Meanwhile, John bursts through a door and stares ahead of him as he finally sees who he's looking for. Inside the classroom, Sherlock lifts his gaze from the bottle he's holding and looks towards the door. And the camera zooms over his shoulder, out of the window behind him, across the courtyard, and through another window is John, standing in an identical classroom in the other building, too far away to be of any help. Unaware that they're being watched, Jeff continues to hold up his pill as he looks at Sherlock. I bet you get bored, don't you? I know you. A man like you is so clever. But what's the point of being clever if you can't prove it? Still the addict, but this is what you're really addicted to, isn't it? You do anything at all to stop being bored. Slowly, Sherlock moves the pill closer to his mouth. Jeff matches the movement with his own pill. You're not bored now, are you? Isn't it good? A gunshot rings out and a bullet impacts Jeff's chest close to his heart, continuing through his body and smashing into the door behind him. He falls to the ground. Sherlock drops his pill in surprise. In the opposite building, John has his gun raised and aimed out the window. He lowers the gun to his side. In the other building, Sherlock runs and slides behind the desk and hurries towards the window, bending down to stare through the bullet hole in the glass. The window of the opposite room is open, but there's nobody in sight. As Sherlock straightens up, Jeff breathes heavily and coughs. Sherlock turns back, looking around the room and seeing one of the pills laying on one of the desks as Jeff convulses on the floor and gasps and coughs in pain. Sherlock snatches up the pill, kneels down, and shoves it in Jeff's face. Jeff looks up at him in shock because the man is laying in a large pool of blood, but Sherlock cares more about the pill and if he got it right. When Jeff doesn't respond, Sherlock angrily throws the pill across the room. Okay, tell me this. Your sponsor. Who was it? The one who told you about me. My fan. I want a name. You're dying, but there's still time to hurt you. Give me a name. Jeff shakes his head, and Sherlock doesn't like that answer. He lifts his foot and puts it on Jeff's shoulder. A name. Now. The name. Moriarty! Sherlock steps back and silently mouths the word Moriarty to himself. Later, outside the college, Sherlock is sitting in the back of an ambulance. The paramedic puts an orange blanket around his shoulders as Lestrade walks over. Sherlock gestures to the blanket. Why have I got this blanket? They keep putting this blanket on me. Yeah, it's for shock. I'm not in shock. Yeah, but some of the guys want to take photographs. So, the shooter, no sign? Cleared off before we got here, but a guy like that would have had enemies, I suppose. One of them could have been following him, but got nothing to go on. Oh, I wouldn't say that. The bullet they just dug out from the wall is from a handgun. Kill shot over that distance from that kind of weapon, that's a crack shot you're looking for, not just a marksman, a fighter. So clearly he's used to violence. He didn't fire until I was in immediate danger though, so strong moral principle. You're looking for a man, probably with a history of military service. While he's talking, he turns his head to look around the area and sees John standing some distance away behind the police tape. He trails off as John looks back at him innocently and then turns his head away. Sherlock clearly begins to realize the connection. Lestrade turns to follow Sherlock's gaze, but Sherlock turns back to him before he can start asking any questions. Actually, do you know what? Ignore me. Ignore all of that. It's just the shock talking. Sherlock starts walking away towards John, but Lestrade shouts after him. Where are you going? I just need to talk about the rent, but I've still got questions for you. Oh, what now? I'm in shock. Look, I've got the blanket, and I've just caught you a serial killer. Okay, we'll bring you in tomorrow. Off you go. Taking the blanket off from around his shoulders, Sherlock bunches it up and tosses it through the open window of a car and ducks under the police tape. John immediately starts talking. Sergeant Donovan just been explaining everything. The 2 pills. Been a dreadful business, hasn't it? Dreadful. Good shot. Yes, must have been through that window. Well, you'd know. Need to get the powder burns out of your fingers. I don't suppose you'd serve time for this, but let's avoid the court cases. Are you all right? Yes, of course I'm all right. Well, you've just killed a man. Yes, that's true, isn't it? But he wasn't a very nice man. No, he wasn't really, was he? And frankly, a bloody awful cabbie. That's true, he was a bad cabbie. Should have seen the route he took me to get us here. The 2 start giggling as they're walking away. Stop, Sherlock, we can't giggle. It's a crime scene. Stop it. You're the one who shot him. Don't blame me. Keep your voice down. You were going to take that damn pill, weren't you? Of course I wasn't. Biding my time. I knew you'd turn up. No, you didn't. It's just how you get your kicks, isn't it? You risk your life to prove you're clever. Now, why would I do that, John? Because you're an idiot. They both laugh and Sherlock starts going off about dinner. End of Baker Street. There's a good Chinese place open till 2. As Sherlock is going on about the Chinese place, a car pulls up and the man who had abducted Sherlock earlier gets out. Sherlock, that's him. That's the man I was talking to you about. Sherlock walks closer to the man and stops as the man opens his mouth. So, another case cracked. How very public-spirited. Though that's never really been your motivation, is it? What are you doing here? As ever, I'm concerned about you, Sherlock. Yes, I've been hearing about your concern. Always so aggressive. Did it ever occur to you that maybe you and I belong on the same side? Oddly enough, no. We have more in common than you'd like to believe. This petty feud between us is simply childish. People will suffer, and you know how it always used to upset Mummy. I upset her. Me. It wasn't me that upset her, Mycroft. And John just has to interrupt. No, wait. Mummy? Who's Mummy? Mother. Our mother. This is my brother, Mycroft. He's your brother? Of course he's my brother. So he's not what? I don't know, criminal mastermind? Close enough. And Mycroft has to defend himself. For goodness sake, I occupy a minor position in the British government. He is the British government, actually, when he's not too busy being the British Secret Service agent or the CIA on freelance business. Good evening, Mycroft. Try not to start a war before I get home. You know what it does for the traffic. Sherlock walks away as John keeps grilling Mycroft. So when you say you're concerned about him, you're actually concerned? Yes, of course. I mean, it is a childish feud. He's always been so resentful. You can imagine the Christmas dinners. Yeah, no, God, no. I better, But before he walks away, John tries to hit on Not Anthea, who once again is glued to her phone, but it doesn't work, so he runs off after Sherlock. Sherlock tries to convince John that he can always predict the fortune cookies, but John doesn't believe him. No, you can't. Almost can. You did get shot, though. Sorry? In Afghanistan, there was an actual wound. Oh yeah, shoulder. Shoulder, I thought so. No, you didn't. The left one. Lucky guess. I never guess, John. Yes, you do. What are you so happy about? Moriarty. What's Moriarty? I have absolutely no idea. Back at Mycroft's car, Not Anthea turns to Mycroft, who's watching the boys as they walk away. Sir, shall we go? Interesting, that soldier fellow. He could be the making of my brother or make him worse than ever. Either way, we'd better upgrade their surveillance status. Grade 3 active. Sorry, sir, whose status? Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And that is the end of the episode. Guys, I think I was in way over my head on this one. Like, I love this show because it's so unhinged, but so incredibly well orchestrated. But I didn't realize how freaking important every single detail is, either for the plot or just to make sure that the relationship development between John and Sherlock doesn't get lost. The actual episode is only about like an hour and 30, and I haven't edited this yet, but I have a feeling it might be a lot longer than the actual episode. You know who I blame for this? Benedict Cumberbatch. He's just so good at like talking with his expressions and his hand gestures that I can't replicate that. If you haven't watched the show and mysteries are like your favorite genre, then please just trust me and go watch it. This is just the setup for the rest of the series, so I hope it wasn't too confusing and you guys had a good time listening to it. Anyway, that'll be all for today. I will see you all next week. Bye!